Good morning.
Hi, good morning. So have you been brought aware of it by any individual? Oh, looks like we're gonna be up and moving around.
Yes, you are.
All righty.
Not a whole lot.
Rebound, back to work, things all well. All is well.
And I'm like,
Oh, everybody's all huddled. What's the matter? Well, we really Oh, it's when you come out and come here. Oh, okay. That's what I was about to say. What's that, Dad? Actually.
Windsor Mill.
Yes, it's fresh. Oh, so is everything, everything you need? Okay. It's nice to see you again. We met this summer. That was what. Don't tell that much more to it, because I'm gonna get the answer.
I don't want to take a minute. What's this? Food fall?
Yeah, they have the shirts.
I go, how did you do your hair?
That's why you say that is all it costs. So you might have like.
I am. So I need to wait one. Yes, he's a good guy.
That's why I'm saying.
They're not.
Okay, everybody's wrapped up like this.
Once again, hashtag please report to the cafeteria. Hashtag please report to the cafeteria.
No. Okay. Hey, first. At Christmas, like, you know, I felt festive.
Where you been?
You know, I went to the,
Going up to 100, sorry.
I hope that's enough, but I just want to. The discount place.
I've heard of this deal, right? There's an asset. $13. $13.
Ralph, just come back over. Yeah.
Don't look.
Shut up. Shut up.
Do you need a narrative? A teddy bear? I'm married though, but thank you.
All right.
Way in the back side.
Everyone can take a seat. We're about to get started. Down, down. Finish. I'm sorry. I got all that blackjack. Hopefully everyone had a positive weekend. Got through some lesson plans, things of that nature. Today's PD is being held with Robert Murphy. Robert Murphy is a staff specialist from Maryland State Department of Education. He specializes in alternative schools, dropout prevention, as well as equity and cultural practices within schools. Please give Mr. Murphy your utmost attention. Mr. Murphy has been doing this for a long time. Actually, Mr. Murphy. You see the little break. Mr. Murphy actually was the keynote speaker at the Assistant Principals Conference held for Anne Arundel County, as well as presented at numerous colleges pertaining to cultural practices within schools on the elementary and secondary and post-secondary level. So would you please give Mr. Murphy your utmost attention? I'd appreciate it.
A few rules as me as a presenter. You guys are adults. If you got to use the bathroom, just I ask that you do it politely. Also, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Say I got something to say, whatever. This should be an exchange, not a dictation. If you have any questions, like I said, put them out there in the ethos. I'll try to answer them. Maybe your peers might have the same questions, but I really want this to be about us sharing and us having a conversation versus a dictation by me, the presenter. So are we cool with that? Anybody else want to add any other rules? Oh, I need to ask one other thing. I have a video camera in the back that is taping me and is pointed directly at me. And I do this because I like to have the best critique in my life, which is my 17-year-old tell me, Dad, you sucked at this, you did well at this, yeah. So is it okay that I take myself? Again, it's not going to move, it's just going to be pointed directly at me. Is everybody cool? Okay. I want to make sure that I got no felonies or nothing out there. So I'm just kidding. So as Mark said, actually it's kind of funny, we've kind of gone full circle as Mark talked about, our principal Mark talked about, I have this gray in my beard. But actually years ago, Mark worked for me at a program in Baltimore City. So that's actually where I know Mr. Brown from. So it's actually kind of funny to see it come full circle. When I saw him, he was like a, like a scraggly college kid, who, who was struggling, and now he's a principal, goes to middle school. So applause. So moving forward, shifting paradigm opportunity for all students. I'm not going to read them. I'm going to allow you to read. Does it start pointing?
The button on the top is the.
Okay. What's really important for me about these last probably the last one, which is to have fun and share. Oftentimes we have these conversations that are related to race, culture, whatever, and they become conversations that are cumbersome. People are scared, people don't want to share, people have issues, people have whatever. I want us to have a real dialogue, or at least as much of a dialogue as we can have in an hour and 50 minutes. You have index cards on your table. Please write on them your opinions or your thoughts about black students. I want the first thing that comes to mind. It could be a sentence, it could be a word. And please, when you give it to somebody at the end of the table, flip it over so no one sees it. You can put all. Yeah, just put all. I'm sorry. And remember, I don't know your writing, so you can write, be as free and as honest as you'd like to be.
Excuse me, Mr. Burton.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Is this a universal statement or specifically as it applies to what's with those students?
It can be in whatever way you want. It is the first thing that comes to your mind, whether it be based on Windsor Mill, or it be to your experience outside of Windsor Mill.
Yes, sir.
We about done? Or we need more time? Can you correct it?
Chewing again? One ice and ice cream, we like I had lunch this morning.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I got them all over here. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we start talking about, I want to thank you for participating. Hopefully everybody shared what they needed to share and they were honest in their cards. But I kind of want to talk about where we are kind of in our narrative in the media as it relates specifically to African American students. Largely, our narrative in the media is particularly about African American males, and to some extent about African American females. So when we look at our narrative in the media, we've got apathetic toward education, we've got overly aggressive, athletic,
Please pardon this interruption. Ms. Garner Nelson, please contact the main office at this time. Ms. Garner Nelson, please contact the main office.
Ms. Garner, please contact the main office. Ms. Garner, they're looking for you. So, let me ask you guys a question. What were some of the historical narratives about black people as it relates to slavery and in those times? Anybody care to share?
You mean the negative?
The negative stereotype. Lazy, stupid,
Would work slow as a protest.
work slow, protest. Anybody else care to share?
Insubordinate?
Yes.
Animalistic.
Animalistic,
Insubordinate?
insubordinate. So when we look at kind of this narrative in the media, a lot of what we got in the media also are the same historical stereotypes. And I'm gonna tell you a quick story. I was in North Carolina about 2 weeks ago. I'm a northern boy. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. First time in my life I'd ever seen cotton. First time in my life 2 weeks ago I'd seen cotton. And I don't know if everybody knows about cotton in here, but I actually got out to touch a plant. And essentially picking cotton is like picking roses. There's a lot of thorns. And so to somebody's point back here where they talked about being lazy or working slow, if you had to fill a bag that was probably half your size full of cotton and you were picking from cotton plants, I can imagine that you're getting thorns stuck in your hand, so I would imagine you probably would work relatively slow given the fact that, the plant is harmful. So anyway, we got these historical narratives that continue to play themselves out as it relates to our daily narrative. So we got not poor Michael Vick, but we got Michael Vick, who's athletic, but who now, because he killed some dogs or because he was part of a dog fighting ring, is now just a monster. We got all these different examples as it relates to being overly aggressive. We look at even our state, and we'll talk about you guys' data in a little while about suspensions, but we look at our state. 60% of suspensions in this state are African American students. And the majority of those suspensions are for non-violent things. They're for sassiness, they're for insubordination. I think somebody brought it back here. So they're not necessarily even for violent or physical offenses. So we've got a historical narrative, a media narrative, and a social narrative that feeds identities, perceptions, and treatments. And here's the reality about that narrative. We all see it. It's not just white people see it, black people see it, Latinos see it. Everybody sees kind of these narratives, and then everybody responds to those narratives. So I, as an African American, and I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, my mom, now this is my mother, she said, "Bobby, what are you guys going to do over the weekend?" I said, "Mom, we're probably going to go kayak." She said, "Oh, Bobby, that's what white people do." So I've been taking my daughter kayaking the last 12 years. I didn't know that's what white people did. And she said, "Bobby, you guys live like white people." And I said, "Well, Mom, what are you talking about?" She said, "There's no smells in this house. There's like, it don't smell like soul food in here, and it doesn't." I mean, all of these things that this is my mother, this is the woman who gave birth to me said. But this is her perception of what black is. So I asked her, I said, "Mom, what is black?" And she kind of gave me this kind of befuddled look and said, "Well, you know black." And I said, "No, Mom, what is black?" Because I see black people kayak. As a matter of fact, where I go kayaking, I see black people kayak. So when I say this to you, please understand that this is not just a white thing or a black. It is we all receive messages, and later on we'll talk about communication. I want you guys to read this and tell me if you agree with it. And if you agree, raise your hand.
Maybe not 100%.
Hold on, I'm going to go back to him. If you have a comment, go ahead, brother.
Oh no, I say maybe, I agree with it, but maybe not 100%, like 90%. But
So which part do you agree with?
most of it. Honestly, like all of it, but you can't blame parents 100% for certain kids underachieving. Sometimes it's kids, sometimes it's teachers, stuff like that. But I know a lot of times there's a struggle with parents and having I've even had parents say, "I don't know what to do with them."
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you want me to do that, you can't control them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why.
Yes.
Looking at it in terms of like reading and language arts, which is my field, I often ask the students, were you read to as a child? Just to get kind of some feedback from them, when you were read to as a child. And, you know, the majority of the kids said no, they weren't when she was a child. And I think if we don't have that kind of basis for, you know, knowledge in books at the beginning, it's hard to really gain that or, you know, catch up to those who have had that. You know, so they are in somewhat of a disadvantage if they haven't been read to or they weren't introduced to books early on in their lives.
Yes.
That statement about children, whereas I agree with it, I see it as a statement about poverty, not a statement about race. Because if you come from a school that is equally black and white and poor, it is, that factor doesn't, it's not just racial, it's poverty. And in a school where you don't necessarily have the same concentration of, you know, our school is virtually 100% African American, but we have a diversity in the backgrounds the kids bring. And I think it's for me, that statement shows some poverty, but not race.
Come to you, then you, back to you. Yes.
I don't see it as poverty or anything. I do believe that parents are a bigger part of the culture, but I opted not to send my child to a predominantly expensive white school because my son has been reading since age 3, and at this $21,000 school, they were not. So I don't, yes, I agree that parents are the culture, but I don't necessarily believe that it has to do with race or with money. I think it's just the parents and how they raise their children.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't necessarily, I mean, I agree that poverty is a factor at times, but I think that also in our culture where you have 2 working parents, I think that I know for me, when I go home and I'm tired from working with kids all day, and now that I have, you know, a 5-year-old who's in kindergarten and I'm tired and I have to sit down with her and I have to find the energy to do homework with her and work with her and take care of a 2-year-old, I mean, we have to be parents. We have to shift gears. So, I mean, we have to find the energy and time to work with our kids. So, I mean, that's a factor in itself too. So, I mean, sometimes I think that parents look for the schools to solely be to deal with education, and they don't take on the responsibility at home. So they're not taking the time to read to their kids because some of, you know, they're working jobs and then they're coming home and they're not dealing with any of the educational aspects. So the kids they are falling behind.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that it's a lot about attitude. So if a parent, you know, has shown attitude towards a child that maybe feel or did not do well in school themselves, and so that's the attitude they've carried about school. That's the attitude the child will go to school with, kind of putting it off, you know, being negative about it. And then as far as, I think it's a pretty intense statement at the end. The school's not going to undo the lack of motivation, but you can educate the parent, you know, how to just be involved a little bit more. But as far as the child can be turned around, I feel like. Maybe not the parent, but the child can. But it comes to the attitude, which is what I think affects the child.
Yes, and then
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think the end was the really powerful part, was going to undo that lack of motivation. That is the part that I think is the key component there, is really motivating the child to learn. And I think a lot of that is where the parent comes in, because we can motivate them in school, but then when they go home, where's that motivational piece coming from? And you know, it really needs to be reinforced at home, and that's where they get that extra assistance. That's where are they getting that before they even come to school? So I mean, because when they get to kindergarten, they can come to kindergarten and they can get it there starting at kindergarten, but then it's the progression from there on. By the time they get to 3rd grade, that's where you can test in 3rd grade and say, okay, is this child going to be successful from that point on? And that's really, I mean, that's where they predict, okay, how many jails are we going to need? And from 3rd grade, that's where they do those statistics to predict how many jails are we going to build, you know, in the future and things like that. So when you look at statistics like that and they do it based on 3rd grade reading levels, I think that blows my mind. So,
I'm sorry. Yes.
motivation.
Not all children are being raised by their parents. So, you know, some are being raised by grandma, or dad, Aunt Sally, or whoever. So that's, you know, so you can't, sometimes you can't put the blame on the mom and the dad. They may not be in the impression.
I'm going to add something to the conversation because I think it's very important piece that I think sometimes we forget in education. So I use my daughter as an example all the time. My daughter plays softball. She's on the varsity team. She's been on varsity for the last 3 years, started first baseman. But I, as her father, as a professional with degrees, can say I'm going in work early because I have a set schedule. So when her softball season kicks in, I make sure I'm at work by 6:45 so I can leave work by 3:15 so I can get to the game by 3:45. The question becomes, if I work at Walgreens or Walmart or Target, I don't have that option. And the funny thing about our economy and the way that it used to function, as I said, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, born and raised, but I can remember as a young boy in my neighborhood, we had six automakers in Michigan. 6 became 5. Didn't really feel a rumble. 5 became 4. I began to see my friends, parents, separate, divorcing, folks losing their houses, losing their cars, because no longer could these people support their families. And so let's fast forward that to 2012. Well, those same jobs where a lot of our families in Baltimore, people worked at Bethlehem Steel, Allison Transmission, you name it, all of those things, the docks, all of those things have dried up. So non-skilled workers don't really have an opportunity to make a middle-class living. Thus, wives or whoever else don't get to stay home. So we've got 2-parent households who are working. And again, as a professional, I can say I'm taking the time off. Today, I can go to MSD and say I'm taking 5 hours off in the morning and still get paid by the same amount. Try that at KFC. Try it at Target. And I'm not suggesting that parents parents shouldn't have some responsibility. All I'm saying is that it's a different paradigm. Back in yesteryear, we used to have those opportunities, and mothers were typically at home, and they were raising children. That was essentially their primary work, which was homemaking. Unfortunately now, because of the cost and everything else associated in our society, we don't really have those options or those opportunities unless we're talking about really affluent families. And real quick, one statistic, and I'm going to come back here because I know somebody had a comment. Married mothers, on average, work about 50 hours a week. That's including work and working in the household. Single mothers work about 88 hours a week. Now, it's only 168 hours in a week. So we've got over half of their time is spent working around the house and working at a job. Let's say you sleep 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you're tired. We've now added 56 hours to that 88 hours, which is now 144 hours of 168 hours, which leaves you 24 hours in your week to do whatever it is you want to do, whether it be about your life or your kid's life. I'm not suggesting that there isn't some responsibility, but I think we have to also understand that people live in a different reality than us. Yes, somebody back here had a comment? Yes?
Well, 2 things. One is, you spoke exactly on what my thought was. Not necessarily that it's a poverty thing or a race thing as far as this statement goes. It's more about what is happening in our world right now, the strains and stress. And the focus has gone away from family, I feel like, and more on survival. So therefore, the neglect comes in with that parent or the parents that are trying to make ends meet or make the best of the situation, regardless of what their academic status is. So that was my first thought. The second thought was, while we talk about motivation for a kindergarten or preschool child doesn't come with the thought of academics or achievement. It comes by acceptance. So what happens to focusing on that child starting school with the right social adaptation or skills to, socially connect with the students, and then move from there to kind of get them involved into the academic piece. Now, I'm not saying don't read to your child, because I'm an avid reader with my daughter and my son. However, I think that the focus needs to be on getting the child prepared to be accepted or to understand how to socially interact, and then move from there to the academic piece. But too much emphasis is put onto the academic piece to the point where it becomes a burden to a child early on, and therefore the motivation for it is lost, or the genuine motivation for it is lost in the next time.
Yes.
I probably missed a good portion of this discussion, but I think back, I'm the child of the 60s, and my mother would enroll me in the school, and she says, I'm not coming back up here. And I would never never see my mother for PTA conferences, for anything, games or whatever. She says, I'm not coming back working, doing what she had to do as a single parent. And I just think that, many of us, my mindset is, and the way that I work with kids, if I never see that parent, I'm okay with that. Because my job, or I used to accept that as my role, my job is to motivate that child, to get them excited about learning, to bring to bear, a reason for their existence in this world and why it's important for them to succeed and to do some things that maybe they haven't heard in their community or they haven't seen, and give them experiences that will get them started and get them moving forward. So I'm great if a parent shows up, but I'm okay and even better if I never see them, because I do what I have to do to keep those kids going. And that's sort of my mindset. Because I hear a different discussion, but I think it's important for that educator to take the reins and to make sure that kids are learning and want to be learners.
I'm going to come to Mr. Brown for a second, and I'm coming to you. Real quickly, one of the biggest questions we have to ask ourselves as educators is, can we teach motivation? And that's just something to think about right now. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Just really two thoughts. In a middle school setting, one of the things that I constantly think about is the fact that we spend more waking hours with those students than the parents spend as far as waking hours. You take out the 8 hours the kid is at home asleep, we have them more than the parents have. And I think in the mindset of a lot of parents, and I know one grandmother said, well, it's your job to fix them. Literally said to me, it's your job to fix my child. It's because you have them more than I have. So I think that we also have to take into consideration the influence that we have and the responsibility that we have to motivate students. Because we do have them more than the parents have. The second thought simply being, when it talks about parent involvement, as an educator, to be quite honest, I'd rather have the parent that wasn't involved than the parent that was overly involved, to the point that they beat me in my day, they're showing up at school every single day, point that they're getting on my nerves because they're too involved. And I think there's a lot of educators that feel the same way. I'd rather have the uninvolved parent than the parent that is constantly calling me, constantly checking back. So you have to ask yourself, when you talk about the previous example, which would you really rather have? Because I know the answer that many of us would probably give. And that takes the parents out of it.
Yes, ma'am, and then I'll move forward to the next slide.
I think that Nicole made a great statement, and then you also did, Ms. Rich, that when you're younger and you're going to school, that's the really big thing that I can remember. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to see my friends. So there is that really big social acceptance piece, and that's one of the things that motivates them. So why do they come to school? They want to be here. They want to know what's going on. They're excited. They're energized. They want to get there. What's happening? Who's doing what? Who's doing what? And the parent, my parents, I think back and I'm like, that was one thing that motivated me. I didn't need my parents there. I did it because I wanted to do well for myself. And I don't know any kid that really thinks, I want to fail. There's no one that's really sitting there saying, I want to fail, I don't want to do well. You want to do well for yourself. And so, I think that's something when you really think about it, there's no child that's sitting there saying, well, I want to fail, I want to do poorly. So there is some sense of there's something there that they want to do well. They want to be here in some sense. So we just have to pull that out from them.
I would suggest that no parent wants their kid to be unsuccessful. I've yet to be a parent that says, my daughter grows up, I want to be a prostitute. My son grows up, I want to be a drug dealer. I don't know of any parent that wants that as a reality for their kid. What happens is we have these ebbs and flows throughout life that make things happen later on in life. So I think that's very important to recognize. A real rich discussion. I'm going to allow you guys to read this one and we'll have a shorter discussion about this one. take it back? You agree?
Yeah. I just, it, I don't know, it makes sense. That's it.
Go ahead.
I don't agree with it, I just don't know. I came from a family where we sat down and had dinner every night together. I mean, the things that these kids bring to school, I have no experience with, and I can't imagine what a wound that would, an emotional wound a divorce would give you, because I don't know. So I can't make any comment on this if I want.
Did you have a hand up? Yes.
I did. I don't necessarily think that it's poverty. I think it's the correlation that goes with poverty and education. Like a lot of you are saying, well, I go home and I read to my kids. Well, part of the reason you read to your kids is because you're educated and you understand what reading to your kids does for your kids. So it's not necessarily the poverty, in essence, that does it. It's the lack of education that correlates with that poverty, and the lack of understanding goes with that poverty. There's a great, I can't remember the title of the book, I'll have to look it up. But there was a study that they did in Harlem years ago where they started educating the parents. And when they educated the parents and they opened schools for the parents, the children's performance improved drastically. And it had nothing to do with the poverty. It had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with what the parents knew about how to raise a child.
And I was going to say, I think one of the points, I'm going to come to you, Madam Green. I think one of the points we have to also recognize is that you are the authority as it relates to children and educating children. So that might be why parents say to you, well, you manage it. You have the formal training. I got knocked up at 19, 18, 17, 25, whatever it is. And I come from possibly dysfunction, or maybe I come from function. Whichever, but you are the authority. You spent 7 years of your life going into this field and learning about this particular group. So if you don't have the answer, what makes you think I have the answer? Yes, ma'am, Green.
Okay. I think this is kind of like a sensitive topic because it's so debatable, and I feel like we all can say like we know someone that's either in our family or we know closely that's just kind of screwed up big time. And it doesn't matter how much money you have or whatever. Like anyone can go down the wrong path.
The one thing that concerns me about this statement is this. Huge umbrella, because underneath poverty comes drugs and abuse and all those other things that of course affect the kids' education. The reality is in America is that we got a drug problem. It's not a black drug problem, it's not a white, it's a drug problem. The city of Baltimore right now, the underground economy in Baltimore at one point was estimated as doing $3 billion with a B, $3 billion a year in the city. Now, I know most of y'all have gone through or live in Baltimore City. $3 billion ain't coming from all the folk in Baltimore City. No. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. I mean, certainly there is some money that's coming, but the reality is money's coming from outside of Baltimore City. And unfortunately, that's not the conversation that we have. I would actually argue that kids who have more resources actually are more dangerous and more at risk than those kids who don't have resources, because I know if a kid doesn't have resources, I know pretty much how that's going to play out. He's going to get mad, she's going to get mad, there's going to be a fight, there might be some reconciliation, maybe there's something that happens outside of school, but by and large, it's a pretty predictable situation. A kid with resources, I don't necessarily know. That could mean that we're going out back to the building, we're getting drunk, we're getting high at somebody's house, and that means whatever it is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I'd like to, I just want to clarify what you're saying because I kind of had a hard time thinking for a second. But I agree at the first part because I have seen that anger, especially when I taught in the city, from kids that just, they grew up in such an angry environment. But I also agree with what you just said. A lot of the upper middle class kids have, I mean, they're not in the city. We had some problems with some kids smoking weed and stuff like that. But in an upper class school that I've been at, people were doing pills, they were doing coke, they were doing all kinds of stuff like that. The harder drugs because they could afford to do it. Mom and Dad gave them that little money and they went and they spent it on coke and there's overdoses and doing pills and all kinds of stuff. So I think that's a little bit of a myth too. And you're right, I think a lot of the business in Baltimore is people from the county coming down from Timonium, from Delaney and all that stuff, coming down, getting their fix and driving back.
I'm going to come to you, ma'am. We'll go to one man over here who had his hand up. I can see you.
Yes. You know, as we delve into this, we take a look at some of the statements on there. We look. I was actually discussing this with Mr. Brown about the To say that it's drugs and abuse are just an aspect of poverty, well, no. I mean, it's probably going on everywhere. It's just that those different socioeconomic classes have different ways of hiding the problem and keeping the problem covered up. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and we had such a high number of my friends that died from heroin overdoses. It wasn't that the problem didn't exist, it's just that we hid it. It was not talked about. It wasn't something that we looked at. So, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's an issue everywhere. And one issue for one group is the issue for the others, how much it's discussed.
Yeah, the reality is we all have the same issues. It's how we manifest it. That's just unfortunate. That's the reality. Yes, ma'am.
I think a big difference is not the fact that, some people, let's say Delaney High School, those kids can afford better drugs than kids at Parkville High School. When I was growing up, I'm a Baltimore County resident, born and bred. And, I mean, that's the way the rumor was. But the thing was, is the parents weren't making the money from drug deals. That wasn't the income for the family. And that's what you were addressing earlier, is that, the majority of the income is from Kmart, and you're putting your child up against the doctor's kid. Well, which one's going to do better in school? The doctor's kid, yeah, they can afford some drugs, but eventually they're going to get past that. They're going to be in a good college. They're going to a more prestigious high school to start with than the kid whose parents are working at a Kmart and doing little, drug deals on the side, trying to make ends meet for their kids. There's a big difference there. It's not the drugs the kids are taking; it's what the parents.
It's the resources that people have. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Everybody's focusing on the bottom part of the statement. But the top part of the statement is basically saying we're counting these kids out at 2 or 3 years old. If you're telling me at 2, I learned all that I need to learn about managing anger or expressing anger, life is about choices and role models. And when it comes to us, it is our responsibility to show them a better way, to model for them. And then as they get older, again, life is about choices. People decide how they want to express themselves. But you can't choose to express yourself in a certain way unless it's been modeled for you as you're enforced. So I agree with a lot of the statements. I think money, you can never say that money doesn't play a role in anything, because it does. You can't keep without money. You can't go lay your head down in a comfortable place without money. Money will play an issue in certain aspects. But you cannot count out a child at 2 or 3 years old and say that this is all they're going to learn about anger management without modeling for them the choices that they can have when they get older in life.
I think one of the challenges, I'm a firm believer that if we ask the right question, we get the right answer. And I would argue that most of the premise of our questions are always rooted in what's wrong with them. So we look at it from a perspective that says, these kids, they've got all these issues, they can't do this, they can't do that, versus possibly trying to highlight some of the positives or some of the more affirmative or assets that the kids have. So we kind of asked the question, are biology and or socioeconomics as destiny? I think you firmly said that that's not the case for you. But in those statements that we agreed with, we kind of said that in some cases we might kind of believe that. Yes, sir.
I mean, I think that culture plays so much of a big role, though, going back to that first point. I grew up right outside DC area, like Silver Spring, that's an area where there's so much diversity, and I grew up around a lot of black people, a lot of Africans, and a lot of African Americans, and they lived in the same area, the same socioeconomic status, but their culture is so different. And then I've had 7 friends die in a 3-year period, all from decisions that they made. And some of them were the white, wealthy kids, but a lot of them were my friends I played football and basketball with that are African American, and the decisions that they made were fatal because they were making wrong decisions. I had my friends that were first generation American from Africa, their family had so much more of an emphasis on education, upward mobility, that most of them went to college and graduated and have good jobs now, and they're doing something different in their lives. And I see like my friends I'm still close with that I played football or, I mean, been in this, like family's been in this country for a while and they're not doing much. And they don't have like the same drive. That's why I'm pretty sure it's like a cultural thing. It's not so much about your socioeconomic status or it's just a cultural emphasis on things.
So you're saying the argument really is about culture more so than it is about race?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily race. I think it's just the culture, and the culture could also be different. Where an African American lives in one part of an area versus like another part of an area. I think it's like the culture of that environment, but it's also like your inner culture, because I know people from the same housing units, but one's African, one's African American, and their lives turn out completely different. Went to the same schools, same opportunities, parents made the same amount of money, lives ended completely different.
Yes, I have a question on the other side.
Well, actually, I'd like to piggyback on him speaking about culture. I'm the Chinese teacher too, and spending a lot of time in China, there's a huge emphasis, cultural emphasis on education. And it doesn't matter what part of the country, rich or poor area, everybody's family is focused on that one child or two children getting a really good education because they know it's the future. It doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. Now, the rich people have more means, so they can send them to better places, or they can buy their way into a good school. But it doesn't matter if they're poor. They still have a lot of focus on education. So I back the culture.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know the answer to this, but a question that comes to my mind is how do the students in our school or in lower performing schools, how do they compare to schools like in Appalachia, where you have all white families, but same economics, same drug problems?
In most cases, there isn't a whole lot of difference between low performing schools in urban areas or rural areas. The only difference is the numbers and the culture of the people, or the race of the people that are there. And there really is no answer to this question. Yes, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think based off of what you guys said, part of your culture is your values. So I think more so than the culture, but your values are instilled in your graduates to be successful.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm going to kind of piggyback on what you said about values. I spend a majority amount of time trying to make sure that the students in the class are behaving appropriately so that they can learn, and so that more learning happens. Because if I spend the majority of the class, I spend 80% of the class trying to say, stop this, don't do that, then you're not getting the learning. And if that's what they have every single day in that classroom, it's just bad behavior where a teacher can't teach because they're too busy babysitting or trying to play referee, then they're not getting the education. They're losing out on the learning. Whereas in a school where the behaviors are more controlled because they've been brought up with different values of self-control and respect, things like that, where they sit in the classroom quietly, more learning happens because the teacher has more time to teach rather than try to play referee or control those behaviors or teach the appropriate behaviors.
So what I hear the room saying essentially is that this is more of a values and culture conversation than it is a racial or socioeconomic sense. Is that what I hear? Yes, and then I'm going to move forward.
I totally agree with that. I teach health, and that's a huge part of what we have to discuss is value. And Diana brought up a great point, and to also piggyback, she asked about what happens in the Appalachian Mountains. And I have a friend who teaches in Title V school down there, and actually several of my friends went to school for education in that area. And I asked him, I was like, well, what's it like in that particular environment? And we compared schools, and she's like, your students aren't any different than my students. And over the last 7 years, I was in a different school, a little bit larger, well, a lot larger than this, and a lot of behavioral issues that were needing to be changed, and a lot of things needed to be turned around. We started out with different gangs and spray painting and just a lot of behavioral issues there. And she said it's not any different. The scores, they have to overcome the same kind of scores. The behavior issues are the same. And speaking on values, parents teach them, if you're hit, I want you to hit them back. I want you to beat their ass, and all these kind of things. And I'm like, your parents teach you that. That's how you're brought up. If they hit you first, I want you to hit them back. You don't take that off of anybody. And to hear that coming from students, that's just not how I was raised at all. You know, to communicate and think, and this is what I have to teach in class, and it's trying to reteach them a different set of morals and values, and that's not how you behave appropriately in society, and just learning a whole new set of values that are, you know, and just how to conduct yourself in a learning environment. And that's, I think, when whoever was just saying about how do you behave appropriately to be able to learn and move forward, and how they're brought up, and you were talking about the anger issues and things like that. How do you move forward and to conduct yourself and to be able to focus on learning and survival techniques? It's just a completely different cultural set of values.
Okay, let me say one thing.
Yes.
I think it's important that we all consider the fact that whether us as adults or as students, the values and the rules that they may have to live by when they walk out of this school are not the same rules that we're holding them to. So when I hear things about, well, I can't believe these kids are taught, their parents teach them, if somebody hits you, hit them back. As a grown man, if somebody were to hit me, I'm gonna hit them back. So some of the values that they're taught are being destroyed. So sometimes we as adults have to consider, hey, even as an adult, I might react the same way if the same thing happened, me as an adult or that student. And I think it's a struggle for students to understand the difference of, hey, we got your back, we're gonna make sure you're safe in a school environment versus what happens outside of school. So sometimes it's not necessarily their fault. It's not necessarily their parents' fault. It's sometimes a natural reaction that we have a responsibility to kind of teach them what's appropriate here because we're gonna make sure you're safe.
We had this conversation. I'm gonna come on. I'm go ahead and speak, and then I'm gonna say something else.
Sorry, Mr. Brown, but I just disagree a little bit, because I think that's kind of like a fight or flight issue. You have to, I mean, I would, if somebody hits me, I'm gonna call police and sue you, and you're going to jail. And I say that to some kids sometimes, if you're like, okay, they hit you, but if you would have come and told me before you hit them back, I could have done something about it, and then they get in trouble, and you're off the hook. Like,
I'm out there.
Can I say something about education? Our policies don't support that, though. Our policies say very clearly, if there's an issue, if the hitter hits the other kid, the hit responds back, then they both get suspended.
Yep.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Because now, if you hit back, can be filed assault charges. If you hit back, they can also sue you for assault. Because you've now retaliated, so now you can be filed assault.
The difference what I'm saying is, you can't knock the kid, but that being their initial reaction.
Right.
You can't knock the kid for coming into the situation or a parent teaching their child, this is how you respond. Is it appropriate? No. And that's part of our role, is to teach them there are other means. But I can't get mad at a kid who, if somebody hits them, they swing back. I just can't get mad at you. I can chastise you, I can say there were other options, but in the back of my head, I'm honest. Thank you. If you want to be honest about it, I probably would have hit before you. We don't say that to students, but you gotta be real with yourself about what your reaction is. As an adult, maybe coming from certain cultures, your reaction is, oh, I got you, I'm taking you down 1,000, I'm gonna sue you in civil court. That may be how some of you may respond, but when you look at our students, there are various numbers of students that would respond a different way.
All right, hang on 1 second. Listen, everybody got their hands up. I'm going to give you these last 3 people comments, and then we're going to move forward because we need to talk about the Jackson model. Go ahead, go, and then somebody over here after you. Okay, go ahead.
Right. I mean, my daughter's in Carroll County Schools, and she's in kindergarten, and, you know, and we're obviously, you know, preaching, you know, you want to stay away from violence, you know, just that, you know, some little girl pushed her on the swing set, and, you know, we always say, you know, you don't want to push back, but I'm sorry, you push my little girl, I'm sorry, self-defense, I'm not going to, and I know that you say, oh, you want to preach away from that, but, I mean, there comes a point in time where you don't want someone walking all over you, so, I mean, I know that, I agree with what she's saying, but I gotta also agree with what Mr. Brown's saying as well. I mean, it comes as a parent, it comes as a teacher, it's just such a fine, yeah, I mean, it's just such a fine line, because.
Okay, I don't want to get us to get a couple of minutes. Go ahead, ma'am, and then we'll come over here.
Real quick, as a child of a retired Marine, I was taught that if someone hits you, you hit them back, especially because I'm short in stature. But also as an educated woman, I know that if someone attacks me or hurts me, then once I handle it, I sue them because they hit me first. So the big thing is that you need to make sure that when you're saying things in regards to morals and values, that you talk about the fact that these things are not just about culture or about economics, it's about a lot of things. And we need to think about that as we're talking about this and having this discussion.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
I was a teacher at a holistic center school, and we talked a lot about circles and how your first circle is your immediate family. Teach you your culture, your values, and then you go on to preschool and elementary school, and your circle opens up. And it goes to what you were saying about decisions. So if the family has set in the child these values, whether you agree or disagree with them, as an educator, when they come to you, it's your responsibility to broaden their horizon and help out with those decisions. And I think that we just need to remember that. It's not, and also that culture is not always related to your skin color. Because even here, like, my dad never told me, I'm African American, my dad never told me to hit anybody back. You know, so it's not, everybody's house is different, everybody's culture is different. And as an educator, your job is to help that child broaden their horizon and become a productive citizen in the country.
Can I just add something real quick to the conversation about the whole violence thing? As I mentioned my daughter earlier, she's a senior. 2 years ago when she was a sophomore, she was dating a senior. One of the seniors girls who is believed liked him was essentially bullying my daughter. My daughter went to the guidance counselor, she went to the teacher, she went to the principal. None of this alleviated the situation. So what her father, the educator, told her was, okay, you have followed everything you need to do. If she says another thing to you, you have my permission to clean the floor with her. When my daughter said that, they had another confrontation. My daughter said, my dad has already told me, I can excuse my language, I can kick your ass in the school and there won't be any reprisal at home. The girl looked at her, and from that point on, the girl left her alone. I'm not suggesting that violence is the measure, but my daughter followed everything she could follow, including a processing with the guidance counselor and all that stuff, and it still did not stop the behavior. So eventually she had to take a stand. And that's all I'll say about that. I know you have not spoken yet, ma'am, so I'm going to get you in the conversation, and then we're going to move forward.
Oh, no, I was just saying that we do have to get, it's just humanity, period. The first instinct, and we want to teach our children, you can't always work on that instinct. Everybody's first instinct is to punch back. But as they get older, it is our job. And I don't care whether you're angry at them, whatever. Our job is to take them past that instinctual phase. Or else we're just working, with the lower mammals. We got to get past that instinct and try the other avenues. And I think that's our job. It doesn't matter what they were taught, where they came from. What is our job is to move the child past.
And I would suggest also in a larger context that what are our values as a society? Because we do celebrate oftentimes a lot of violence.
Yeah.
I mean, let's keep it real. So even from a personal perspective and even a kind of a cultural, national cultural perspective, violence is celebrated in our culture. Yes, ma'am, you're the last person, and then we're going to move forward. Yes.
I was agreeing with Ms. Price. If we, regardless of what they teach them at home, if we continue to teach the same things, when they get older, they can't actually in society, they can't do those things. So if we don't broaden their horizon now while they're young, and they go out and they're older, they decide, oh, you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Consequences is jail, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to get in trouble. So if you don't teach them to at least tell somebody to do the right thing first, instead of impulsively acting on it, then they're going to fail.
Very true. Real quickly, the deficit model posits that students who fail, a student who fails in school does so principally because of internal deficits or deficiencies. Such deficiencies manifest as it is alleged in limited abilities, linguistic shortcomings, lack of motivation to learn, and immoral behavior. Teacher expectations, I'm not going to read all this. I will allow you to read it real quick. And again, I would use my daughter as another example. My daughter, the last few years, I sent her to Greece, Italy, Sicily, Crete, and the Vatican her freshman to sophomore year. And then last summer, the summer before last, she spent a month in Costa Rica living with her family. My daughter had this experience down here. In one of her courses, they were talking about Costa Rica. The comments were, Costa Rica is a place where all the people walk around and smoke weed all day. They live in huts, they live in shanties, they don't have electricity, they don't have any of these things. So my daughter raised her hand and said, I lived there for a month this summer, and that's not the case. Sure, there's poverty just like there is anywhere else, but the reality is that the family that I stayed with lived in a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood that was very similar to any American neighborhood. They had all the things that we have. They just speak Spanish in a lot of cases. She was oftentimes, well, she told me she was very frustrated with her class because even though she had been there, it was like her opinion or that her experience meant absolutely nothing. Though she was the only person in the room who had actually been to the country. We talk about values, and that was one of our statements earlier, was that it was the values that created these situations. Well, in this data, and this is the data no matter where you are as it relates to research on teacher expectations for students, this data says that to an extent teachers, and let me be clear, this isn't white teachers, this isn't black teachers, this is teachers, all teachers, black, white, red, green, purple, have lower expectations for Latinos and Latinas, and African American male and female students. So we spoke again earlier about values. Is this what we value? Because the research indicates that is the case. And quite frankly, even with these cards, and I've done this activity all over this country, it pretty much consistently remains the same, roughly 60-40, deficit-based, challenging, lazy. Those are some of the things that are in notes cards. Challenging, lazy, chatty, disrespectful, insubordinate. And if that's the first thing that comes to your mind when you're asked about a particular group, I'm concerned. Because if that's the first thing that comes to mind, when I see a kid, I can see a kid. And this isn't about my values necessarily versus your values. But if that's the first thing that we see, how does that translate, or how does that take place in the classroom? If I see you, what's your name, sorry? Michelle. If I see Michelle as a problem, do I engage Michelle? No. I mean, it's just reality. We as human beings are going to engage or connect to people who do what we want them to do. So if Michelle is chatty or talkative or whatever it is she's doing, or she's doing something that I don't necessarily care for, I'm not going to engage her. So remember earlier I said something about asking the right questions. Am I suggesting that the only thing that needs to happen for African American students is people have higher expectations? No. But the first thing that comes to our mind when we think about a particular group of students is negative, That's problematic on a lot of different levels, and it manifests itself in other ways. Real quickly, this is just research on experimental studies on African American or Black and white students. All four experiments found that teachers were less work with Black than white students. And again, this is teachers. This is not white teachers. This is teachers. And as I said to you earlier, in the narrative of the media, we all get the same message. Quick question. Media question. Can anybody name me a drama that was on network TV that starred African American family? A drama. So, on a network TV, not on Patreon. Liberty Heights. How long was that on? 3 seasons? Was that on BET? ABC Family. A network TV. What do we have? We had, in the 70s, we had Sanford and Son, Good Times, Jefferson's. Now, I want to ask a question. What the hell was good about Good Times? I mean, seriously. James was, all of those stereotypes that we showed on the first slide. Aggressive, ignorant.
Hey, George and Wheezy moved on up.
They did. But here's the deal. George and Wheezy moved up, but George was still talking about, get out, cracker, honky. So George was still ignorant even though he moved up.
That's right.
I love Sanford and Son. I got every season on DVD. I love Sanford and Son. I got a Fred Sanford t-shirt. But what was Fred? Fred was a racist. He was dumb. I mean, I shouldn't say he's dumb. But Fred was a manipulator. What did he do? He had no skill other than manipulate. He played the numbers faithfully. He was drunk on TV. Any number of things.
You have to say the counterpart of Archie Bunker was pretty much the
Yeah, Archie Bunker.
Yes. But here's the thing about Archie Bunker. And I love all of the families. Archie's funny as all get out. But here's the reality. We have Archie Bunker, but we also have ER. We have Archie Bunker, but we got all these other shows that validate. So we okay, Archie.
Yeah.
But if all the black shows show the same stereotype.
Were there no black doctors on ER?
Ernie Hudson.
Yes, Eric LaSalle. Eric LaSalle was the one. Eric LaSalle was
Who goes to ER?
Cheetos, I'm Cheetos on you.
I'm Cheetos?
Yes, I know. I'm gonna come back to that. And again, here's the thing. We're not talking about sidekicks. We're not talking about Robin. We're talking about Batman. And the question becomes, the first question I asked was, in network TV, have we seen an example of an African American family where they are the focal point? Drama. Yes.
You make a good point, and the thing with that is, they are still showing those shows today.
Yes.
But, at the same token, back in the 60s and 70s, we had shows like Cell Block H, or Mary Hartman. I'm going really far back.
You are going back.
And guess what? They don't show those anymore. Look at what they don't show. Those shows are not created and produced anymore. They don't even rerun those shows, but yet they're still showing these negative images of us on TV.
I'm not suggesting that the images weren't funny. All I ask is that there be a balance of the images. And to your point, we got ER. ER came on what, 84?
94.
Okay. 94. Sanford and Son ran from 70 to like 75, 76. Good Times, 72 to about 77. Jefferson's, roughly around the same time period. And again, those things are still in syndication. Yes, sir.
I mean, but then you can also look at like shows like I Love Lucy of the interracial couple from the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
What?
I just think that it's not always just one side. If they weren't depicted as like, you know, a bad couple, whatever. But I mean, it's just like, I mean, I get what you're saying, and there's, I don't know, I get what you're saying. There's not like a black seventh heaven out there. Sister. It's not sister. It's that drama, yeah.
Here's the deal, and I hear your point, but here's the deal. Ricky Ricardo,
I think
I think Ricky Ricardo fit all the stereotypes.
They produced the show on their own because no major network was going to produce their show, and they took a limb, and it's an iconic thing, and like I think that there is room for it. I don't think it's just society. I just think that I don't know.
My point is only this: when you see drama, what does drama do? Drama makes you empathize with people.
Yeah.
When you see a drama, you empathize with the person who's in the drama or people in the drama. Sure. So what happens is we have these images of this is what this group is. And this is all it is of them. They don't hurt, they don't cry, they don't feel this, they don't feel that. And those are the images, again, that we manifest, and they continue to be manifested, yes. And I'm not going to hang up on stay up on TV, yes.
I mean, I'm just asking because I don't know. Who produces these shows?
Norma Lear actually was big on Jefferson's, Good Times.
Is that a white person or a black?
Yeah, it was, yeah. Norma Lear was white, yeah.
Okay. So are you saying that white people are producing all these shows that portray black people in this way?
I don't care who produces the shows. What I'm saying is that the images that are projected are what people are responding to. It doesn't make a difference whether the artist is white, black, red, green, purple. The reality for me is the images that people see, and these images are reinforced. And quite frankly, BET does some of the same reinforcing.
They do.
When they owned it, when blacks owned it, they did some of the same reinforcement. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, there was Julia with Carol, I don't know how long that show was going.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't.
Yes. That was 60s, I think 60-something, 68 to 72. Young man brought up Julia, which was a black drama. I wonder if it was Claudine or something too, I think, for a minute, that was up there. Yes, ma'am, do you have something to say before we move forward? Okay, so we talk about values again, and this is the statement, and this is where we stand. This is from the Birmingham City Council in Britain. And this is a report on their African American students. More teachers and play a major role in young achievement of African American pupils, Afro-Caribbean pupils. And those who know the Caribbean, there is a very different culture between Caribbean African Americans and Caribbean African students and African American students. Yet they have exactly the same experience. Many pupils experience racism at school. Pupils are concerned that work is not challenging enough for them. The degree of care, quality, communication black boys receive, as well as the conflict with their teachers, are all less positive for boys in the group. Parents of boys excluded experience significant distress. Many parents want involvement in their child's schooling, but oftentimes rebuffed, something you talked about, Mr. Brown, earlier. And quite frankly, I've heard from a lot of parents, we want to volunteer, schools don't want us in the building. We want to help teachers. We get told they don't need our help. Most pupils are able to communicate with their parents, but boys find difficulty at school for feeling under pressure to perform, generally do not like to talk about school at home. To your point, these cards that I just had collected from you, these are the majority of what I get. What does some educators think about black boys? Lost, challenging, overly punished, playful, energetic, lazy, entitled, angry, affected learning, trouble, lazy, products of welfare environment, unmotivated, confused, attitude, struggle, disrespectful, and underachieving. As you see Calvin here, what grade did you pick? I got an A, really, boy, I hate to be you, I got a C. Why would you rather get a C than an A? I find that life is a lot easier the lower I keep everyone's expectations. We're going to move because we are at 11:40. Real quick, I just want to focus on this. Recognizing your biases. I will speak about my biases and recognizing. I didn't even recognize some other things. So I've always been big. When I was 3 months old, I weighed 21 pounds. I had to go on a diet. Daughter, I'll bring up again, at a softball game. A young boy is looking at her, and she's got on the tight softball pants, so her hind parts would show a little bit. And so I saw the boy look at her, and I saw him look at me, and I saw him look at her, and I saw him look at me. And you could almost see this processing taking place in his head, like, well, I would like to say something to her. Her dad's really kind of big. And, you know, and I don't know that I want this in my life at this particular time. One of the first times I recognized how large I actually am. And how I don't pay attention to my biases towards small people. I've got a fiance right now. She's 5'3", 5'4". She's 5'3" and a half, and she professes she's 5'5". That's a whole other issue. When I stand in front of her, you don't see her. I have biases I didn't even realize that I have. I also have a bias against Raven folk. That's a whole other thing. I'm still mad. But it's we won't bring that. I would just say this real quick. Please, you don't have to do it here. You don't have to do it here. But start thinking about some of the things that you take issue with. Some people take issue with people in poverty. Some people take issues with people who are in wheelchairs. Some people take issue with whatever. But please start recognizing your biases. And that's for all of us. That's not age group. Real quickly, which lesson is the more rigorous lesson? How many people say A? I'm sorry. Anybody agree with A?
Can you give me another minute?
I'll give you another minute. Okay.
Yes.
Let me see if I raise a show of hands. Who agrees with A? A, anybody with A?
Agree with what?
Which lesson is more rigorous? And I recognize everybody's not an English or a literature person.
This is a social studies class or language arts class?
So I want to answer for you. Lesson B is the more rigorous one. And I show this only because sometimes this is how those expectations play out. Teacher expectations we talked about earlier. So lesson A, write a composition, at least 4 paragraphs on Martin Luther King's most important contributions to this society. Illustrate your work with a neat cover page. Neatness counts. Not necessarily terrible, but not necessarily asking them to really get into the text. A frequent theme in literature is the conflict between the individual and society. From literature you've read, select a character who struggle with society, and a well-developed essay identify the character and explain why this character's conflict with society is important. And here's the deal, Common Core is coming, and this is probably going to be more what Common Core is than that. So we're all going to have to get into that mindset. But again, this is how expectations play out. Yes, sir, real quick.
Yeah, well, aren't they both rigorous to a different student, though? I mean, you can't expect one student that's a little lower to be jumping right to lesson B if they don't know how to master what's in lesson A. So, I mean, based on the initial ability, they're both kind of rigorous. That was my initial kind of thought.
Yes, ma'am.
If you have a regular sign, the direction that lesson A gives tells you what to do. You know, maybe the other one's kind of vague for a student. We're talking about what books this one gives them time.
Yes, ma'am.
When I look at A, as far as writing composition, almost everyone knows how to write. I mean, you start writing composition in elementary school, so that's something you do as far I know some parts of it, but other parts I would have to do some research.
That's fair. So the instructional strategies relates to African American students. Communal learning, this was done by Woodworth Clearinghouse. They offered the opportunity to give students a reinforcer. The reinforcer was money in their particular class. And they asked students, white students, black students, and I think they didn't include, it was just white and black students, what was their motivation? And for black students, the money had nothing to do with it. It was more about communal learning. And so they sat them in groups, and they taught them that way, and then those groups helped each other with whatever the work was. For individual performance, white students actually perform the best. And you can actually look this up at the Woodworth Clearinghouse is part of the U.S. Department of Education. Instruction strategies as well. Black students have wrote essays affirming their personal values, improve their academic performance. 7th and 8th graders by quarter of 11th grade. For low achieving African American students, it was 0.41. And some might ask why we focusing on African American students. The reality is that's who you have in this building. Opportunities where teachers cannot control community, parents, socioeconomic status, or prior history. What teachers can control: attendance, behavior, instruction, expectations, social, and academic. And the reason why I say teachers can control, yes.
How do we control attendance?
Yes.
I'm just about to say that.
I have a student who's an outlier.
I was actually about to say. I
don't know how to get into school.
Certainly, there are extremes. There are certain kids who won't come to school regardless. But we also know that there are many kids who, I have Mr. Murphy 3rd period, and I got Michelle 4th period. You might not see Robert in 3rd period, but you don't see Robert in 4th period in Michelle's class. So what builds those ties are relationships, and we'll talk about that in a second. We're about to do an activity. It builds, those ties are built through how we connect with students. So we do impact to an extent. Real quickly, so as we talk about students, please know that they talk about you. And your reputation precedes you. Sometimes it's a great reputation, sometimes it's a poor reputation. And your problems with a class or student or students may be related to how they talk, just like we talk in the teacher's lounge. You know, that Robert Murphy boy, he's a pain in my eye. Those things that we convey and project to each other, they do the same thing, except they're playing Xbox or PS3. I can't stand Mr. Murphy, he's an ass. And so then he comes to school, and he may not have had you, and he says, oh yeah, Mr. Murphy's ass, because that's what John said. And so you've already got a deficit when the kid comes to your class. Real quickly, everyone grab a playing card at your table. Don't look at it, don't look at it, don't look at it. Playing card, don't look at it, don't look at it, face down. You guys don't have it back there?
Thanks, Wyatt.
Now, listen up, listen up, listen up. The higher your card is, so let me give the quick directions. What you will eventually do is you will get up, you will put your card either in front of your forehead or in front of your chest. And the higher your card is to the person who's looking at it, the more desirable it is to have lunch with you. Is everybody clear?
Is it high or low?
I was about to give you the numbers. Ace, king, queen, jacks are all high cards. Low cards, 4, 3, 2. Now, rise.
6. This is how I look
And then you
at
have
I wouldn't eat lunch for 2.
You didn't look at it?
You could have done better. You could have done better than us. We're just losers.
No, you could have done better. You could have done better.
I'd rather be hearing the stuck up people.
Okay, now,
Jackson Queen.
please look at your cards. If you are not where you belong, go to where you belong.
You got space. I'm not in there because you're in the middle. No one knows how to do it. They didn't invite you. That's what I was in there.
Okay. Aces, kings, queens, and jacks, please tell me how you felt when you walked to people and said, have lunch with me.
I think it's great.
Say again, speak up. Y'all felt good, empowered. Felt like y'all were just cream de la creme. 10, 9, 8, what did you
This hair is
feel?
something glad you're over here.
Listen up. Hold on, listen up, listen up. You felt good. 765, what'd you guys feel?
I was extremely upset because people said
Listen
they
up.
want to have lunch with me, so I knew my card was low, but I wasn't sure how low.
Okay.
I got a couple offers from the like.
I've always felt associated with the.
Listen up, listen up.
I've always gravitated to underdogs, so I felt like the other numbers were inviting me to join them anyway. I felt good about being with them. So then when I switched, I didn't mind, so I had friends over here as well.
You were cross-cultural.
I was multicultural.
Okay. Listen up, because it's really important to hear the 4s, the 3s, and the 2s. What did you guys feel?
I was hardcore discriminated against by several of the administrators.
Not this one.
Listen up.
Not that one. I felt this place. I belong with the queen.
But you were treated a certain way. Anybody else got a comment about how they were treated? Listen up, listen up. Say it again.
He said, no way.
You had no way. I saw people from 4 and 3 and 2, they would walk up and people would turn their back. So here's the deal on how this plays out in schools. So you are the athletes, the 4.0s, the kids who are the creme de la creme in the school's eyes. You're the 3.7s. You're good. You're good. You're good, but you're not them. You're the sea turtles of school. You know, you're there, but and you guys are the group that is the trouble. You guys are the ones that get suspended. You guys are all of those things. And the funny part about it is, with this group, it's just like any group. Everybody wants to be a part of a tribe. Everybody. So they will create a tribe within their tribe. And whether it be the goth kids, it be the kids who are the hustlers, whatever it is, they will show themselves, and you still will have to deal with it. Thank you for participating. Come on back in.
We're selling the drugs.
You're going to be selling them to a point of students said,
I'm pretty sure I know why kids sell drugs now.
You can just leave the cards on the table right here. Okay, so we're going to move forward real quick because we got about 25 minutes left, and I don't like holding nobody up. We got lunch because people get out. Last but not least, real quickly, negative behavior process, discipline at Winterville, and managing the new reality. So here's the negative behavior process. We got stimuli, internal, external. We got emotion. We got, I felt some way, and then I acted. Here's the reality. I have never in my 20 years in education had a student come up to me and say, you know, Mr. Mr. Murphy, I really enjoyed your pedagogical skills. Your use of multiple intelligence was absolutely magnificent. I've never had that. And if you have, please tell me, because I've never seen it. What I've heard and seen from kids in middle and high school, because that's what I did, was, I love you because you love on me. Everything for this group is emotional. We talked earlier about kids coming to school. I did a survey with students across the state. They came to school not because of us, but because of their friends. It was the social piece. And somehow, in some way in education, we've kind of moved away from what their needs are to what our needs are as adults. It's almost like we're ships passing in the night. What's the purpose of suspension? Anybody got an answer?
Don't do it again.
Don't do it again. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Deterrence, to show other students, to prevent them from possibly doing the same thing.
Okay, so deterrence. That's the first time I actually heard that. Thank you. Anybody else care to add? I've heard it's to get the parents to come into the school. I've heard it's to make the parents deal with it. I've heard to give me a break. I've heard all of those answers. That's the first time I heard that. I don't think we really know what the purpose of suspension, because in yesteryear, suspension was, I call your home, your mother's sitting there on the phone, I tell her, Miss Murphy, Robert got in trouble at school, she says, wait till your dad gets home. So suspension, as a support from parents, might have been an effective intervention at one point. But in the day of track phones and Virgin mobile phones and all those things, we might even have the right number. And I don't necessarily know that it's an effective tool because the kids are out of school. Real quickly, and this is not coming up all that well. This is the percent of Windsor suspensions from last year. Over 60% of your suspensions were for nonviolent things. It was assassination, it was disrespect, it was insubordination, which was the largest category. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you go back to what we said earlier, when we mentioned that when you first start school and you love school, you don't want to miss. Like my kids, they never want to miss school. They love school. They don't want to not be able to ride the bus. And when you think back, maybe when it was first put in place, to suspend them from having the opportunity to go to learn, to be around their friends, when it was first put into place,